The Archbishop Desmond Tutu has this past week thrown his moral weight behind a campaign to change the laws so people can choose when to die. Assisted suicide is a contentious issue across the globe, with those advocating for dignity to remain in death through its use pitted against those who see it as a form of individuals trying to play God and that it could easily be susceptible to abuse. An organization which strongly advocates for assisted suicide and for the laws to change in South Africa is DignitySA, which was launched in 2011 out of personal circumstances of its founder, the executive committee member of DignitySA and executive director of the Ethics Institute of South Africa is Professor Willem Landman, who joins us on the show to discuss the work that this organization does from an advocacy perspective to its lobbying and other support functions. Prof, pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure.
Let's firstly understand who and what DignitySA is and what you're all about.
It's just a small voluntary organization, just a few people who got together and who rally around the point that we think the law should change and that our constitution actually mandates that. So we, in a quiet way, got together and people contacted us. And this led to the court case last year when one of the people who contacted us was assisted to bring his case to the North Gauteng High Court, and which led to the judgment, which is now being on appeal.
And it's been appealed by the
Minister of Health, by the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, and by the National Prosecuting Authority.
Yeah, well.
Yes.
Because the court granted the individual concerned the right to terminate the life the way they wished, right? Or that they've reached a point where the life must be terminated.
The judgment had two, or the ruling had two parts. The one pertained to the specific person who made the application, Advocate Stanston Ford. He was given permission to be assisted legally with dying.
Yes.
He died 2 hours before the judgment. Or before the ruling.
Yes.
But there was another component which said that the law, the common law, which says that assisting people to die is murder or culpable homicide, conflicts with the rights enshrined in our constitution. And the judge said that higher courts should look at this, ideally speaking, and then in Parliament should look at this from a point of view as legislation, because our constitution superseded the common law, and there's a conflict, there's a tension.
Now, recently, the Archbishop Tutu also added his voice to this, saying that he supports it and even made a very public appeal, not only in South Africa, but around the world, that governments should reconsider those laws. Why is the Archbishop now involved in this issue?
He's been involved for quite a while.
Yeah.
You would know that Professor Sean Davison had the court case in New Zealand for having assisted his mother, octogenarian medical doctor mother, to die. And he had to go back for the trial. And the Archbishop supported him in that. In fact, a statement by the Archbishop was read in the court in New Zealand. And so he's been consistent in his support for this and arguing that that right is not just a constitutional right, but it's a moral right that can be supported by Christians and can be justified in terms of the Christian faith and the values of Christianity.
Well, Prof, that becomes a bit more complicated for me, and I want to understand it. Because, on one hand, there are the constitutional provisions, our constitution in particular, there are moral, religious questions, and of course the ethics of it, that who gets involved and who does not get involved.
You put your finger right on it. We can look at this whole problematic from two different points of view. I think two important points of view. The one is to look at the ethics, the morality of it. And then that is informed by people's religious beliefs or this deep-seated personal convictions. We will have endless debates about that. We will never reach consensus. Now, when it comes to an issue impacting on public policy, on the law, what are the citizens of the country, as opposed to people's personal beliefs, what are the citizens of the country entitled to? Then we're looking at what the law should be like. So we're asking, what are we entitled to in terms of the laws, and especially the founding law in our country?
Well, let's gain the appreciation, at least before we get to the law, but the circumstances under which an individual may ask for assisted suicide. And it's a relatively new public issue, this. in terms of, you know, us dealing with it in South Africa. So I can imagine a lot of viewers' minds, right, are running all over the place trying to imagine this. But I suppose when you talk about it from the perspective of the person living in pain and who cannot continue anymore, then you gain a different understanding. Just tell me, I mean, the circumstances.
I think it's very important to look at it from that point of view. And first, the non-negotiable is that somebody must ask for it. It's not imposed on somebody. It's not done for somebody without that person's consent, which means that that person has to be competent, has to understand his or her situation, and has to freely, without duress, choose to be assisted to die. So those are some of the conditions. It has to be a condition that is unbearable and intractable, where the progression of a disease is such that, you know, you just can't bear it, and you will. The only way to actually relieve suffering would be to induce what they call terminal sedation. So you made unconscious, and then you wait for the person, the body, to die from hunger or thirst or whatever the case may be, and that may take a while. So some people say we don't want that. We don't want to have that terminal suffering, whether it be for a week or 2 weeks, whatever the case may be, and we don't want to be put into a position where we're unconscious and our family are saddled with waiting for us to die. So first of all, the condition must be, there must be an underlying condition of suffering. And then usually it's seen in the context of terminal suffering, near the end of life. But there are also complications there, because there are other forms of suffering which are not terminal.
Sure, but there's another thing in terms of the law, the constitutionality of it, that in South Africa, the South African Law Commission actually investigated this matter.
Yes, in the late 1990s. And that was at the instigation of President Mandela. It was a Living Will Society that approached him and asked him to look at, you know, that the government look at, or the state then looks at the legality of a living will. He expanded the scope of that investigation to all end-of-life decisions, whether it's, you know, pain management, whether it's assisted dying, whether it's withdrawal of treatment, you know, so-called passive euthanasia, etc., etc. And they brought out 2 reports. There were widespread, you know, inputs into the first report, and that was then handed to I think the Minister of Justice, Minister of Health. But for more than a decade, nothing was done about it.
But do you know what the recommendations were?
Oh yes. It's a report that investigated assisted dying in the world.
But does it recommend that the laws be changed accordingly?
Yes. It actually, the final report actually said there are 3 options, and that, you know, society should decide about that. The one is the status quo; it remains it remains illegal. The second one was that it's legalized or decriminalized, but an ethics committee in a hospital must decide about that. And the third option was that the doctor and the patient, the attending physician and the patient, must decide about that in consultation with the family. So that was left open.
Would you like to comment from DignitySA's point of view regarding the end of life of former President Nelson Mandela, because he was kept on machines for some time? You know what the issues were, if you're familiar with them.
Tim, we don't know the full truth. You know, we heard indirectly what had happened to President Mandela. You know, I've read Zelda Lagrange's book, and it's quite clear that he was kept alive far beyond the point where he should have been kept alive. I do not think, and I can't say that with certainty, that he would have approved of that. I think that it was, in a sense, an assault on his dignity. And I think it was orchestrated in a way. I found the time that he died in December was very convenient for world leaders like President Obama and everybody to come here. I can't prove it to you, but I'm very suspicious of that. The last 6 months of his life were not... did not serve his dignity, and I don't think he would have chosen that.
Now, in the South African context, you have the organization now, DignitySA. Have you been approached by families or individuals who seek your assistance? And just give me the extent of the interest in your work.
Indeed, people ask for advice. Some know it's illegal. They ask, how can we have it legally in Switzerland? What would it cost? What can we do to terminate our suffering. We have many, many requests. Before the court case, there were requests, and we took up the case of one of the patients, and he died before the whole legal process could run its course. And then with the second patient, Advocate Stransom Ford, in May, I think May, June last year, we had the court case. But since then, we've said that we cannot take individual cases further. We have to have this resolved by the appropriate courts.
I'm asking you that question, Prof, because I don't want to get into trouble with other people saying, here's a small-time organization of a few individuals, and they are dealing with an individual's case, and they want to then spread the notion that people can be assisted to terminate their lives.
You see, everybody can approach the court, but the High Court. But it's very cumbersome, and it's time-consuming, it's expensive, and that's why the judge said we should look at this. We were in the early days. We were wondering, how could we change the law, the common law? How could we give people the due recognition of their constitutional right and moral right to be assisted in dying? And we were advised that going the parliamentary route would never work. It's not high on the agenda of Parliament, and that we had to bring a case to the court, so that there's a real life case that can then, and that matters can expand from that. And if I could just add, in South Africa with our constitution, there are groups of people who have rights recognized that I think the majority of people in South Africa don't agree with. I think of same-sex marriages. I think of termination of pregnancy, of the abolition of the death penalty, where the only question is, what does the Constitution allow us, irrespective of what most people believe.
Yes. And in this instance, the Constitution does allow for this in terms of
constitutional lawyers say so. The judges said so. We never know what.
So when is the matter going to be most possibly finalized?
The 4th of November is the day set aside by the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein. 5 judges will obviously look at the documents. They will interrogate the advocates. There may be new arguments advanced too, because some have joined us, like the Centre for Applied Law at Wits, and some have joined the ministers, people who believe that this is not a good thing.
Well, but it's a very important court hearing, and we've got to mark that date on the 4th of November. And assisted suicide is going to be deliberated upon by the Supreme Court of Appeal, Professor Willem Landman.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much.
That.
Much appreciated. He's the Executive Committee member of DignitySA. A very vexed question, this, and we wonder where you stand on it. Comment on Twitter at Tim Modise. Do you support assisted suicide or not? I'd like to hear your views.